for and by women. We love to interview high-achieving women about how they juggle career and impact with their other passion and impact, which is their family. So we are very lucky to be talking to one of my favorites, Tara Thomas, who very interestingly runs risk and compliance, lots of risks in our work as moms, but she runs it for national education nonprofit Teach for America. As Tara knows, I'm a former Teach for America core member, so I love learning about how the organization is evolving. I'm sure you've had a huge job during the pandemic. So first of all, just welcome and tell us anything about yourself, Tara, that you want to say to get started.
Yeah. Hi, all. I'm so excited to get to spend this time with Jackie, who is just awesome. And I have the privilege of getting to know and be friends with, and so excited about this venture that she and Paula are undertaking. So glad to be part of this incredible group of women that are connecting in all sorts of forums, including in conversations like this. So yeah, I'm Tara Thomas. I lead risk and compliance at Teach for America. I think, for the purposes of this conversation, I am really passionate about education. I'm really passionate about my two little humans, Jonah and Noemi, who are 4.5 and 21 months respectively. And we live in Berkeley. And so we're just excited to for life to return back to normal when we can enjoy more of the things that Berkeley has to offer, like so many of us. So just excited to have this conversation and think about all of the dimensions of motherhood, especially at this particular time in our global experience.
Well, you mentioned the pandemic. I feel like the pandemic hasn't slowed you down at all, and particularly just with your bias towards action and getting your kids outside. And like we've done picnics outside. And I am just curious, how has motherhood shifted for you in the last year? Of course, I'm sure the childcare responsibility is required when maybe your childcare program shut down. Just tell us a little bit about what it's like to have been a mom during a pandemic.
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, we are so lucky to live in a part of the country where you can do more things outdoors. I feel very, very fortunate for that. So our journey during the pandemic was like so many. Our children's normal day-to-day became very different in mid-March when our daycare shut down. And so both my husband and I started working full-time at home, which I was already doing. I'm in a remote job already, but having both of us at home and then also having these two wonderful little humans, but who also needed our attention, given their ages especially. And so it became a really interesting dynamic of trying to figure out how to partner together to sort of meet those needs of our children, as well as do jobs that, given the fields that we're both in, just became far more intense at the beginning of a pandemic. So what that really looked like was I joke that at that point, newly minted 3.5-year-old was really raising himself. He did a great job. And our 8-month-old at that time luckily wasn't too mobile. And so she did a lot of hanging out in the baby carrier for a solid 9 weeks. And I will say it's probably the hardest stint of parenting we did. And then we were really fortunate to actually just make the decision to move in with my parents for the summer and spent a glorious Midwest summer in Michigan, which took me back to my childhood and gave us some much needed family support, which couldn't have come at a better time. And then came back here as things started to reopen. And we've been very fortunate to have our kids back in sort of more of a routine since September, which I think has been good for all of us, parents and kids included. And so our life is starting to feel more like it did pre-pandemic with some more restrictions and just slowly easing into what life will look like post-pandemic. So that's a lot of what our journey has been.
Light at the end of the tunnel, though I will share, my husband likes to say, he was an MD PhD. So as you know, that's a long academic path. And he says, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There's just more tunnel. You have to love the tunnel. And when he says it, it comes off as really dark, but I actually kind of love it. And one thing I've learned in becoming a dog mom this past year and soon to be mom is your dog is never trained. You're never done. And so I'm just curious if motherhood is a tunnel, what a never-ending tunnel of joy and many wonderful things, but how do you get through the tunnel? There's never if I make it to blank stage of development, I'm good. Like, no, and you have 2 of them. So what are some of your strategies of getting through the tunnel?
I mean, I think it's been so interesting to see how resilient children are. If this pandemic, taught us anything, is that we are all more resilient than maybe we think, and our kids are actually incredibly resilient. And so I think that's been important for me to keep in mind, is just how do we ensure that we are appreciating the unique needs of both ourselves and our children in these moments,
Wow.
but also appreciating that they are more resilient than we think. And they will surprise us in beautiful and wonderful ways and cause challenges too. But that resilience is sort of at the core of just the human spirit.
Tara, I'm so inspired because I love asking people how they get through their day to day. And actually nobody has told me like the kids will be all right. They're resilient. Like nobody says that. So I just love that worldview, and particularly because YaYa cares a lot about coaching. And so we just launched this week, actually, one-to-one coaching through our platform. And everything I've learned in my coaching training is essentially you really have to believe the person you're working with is creative, resourceful, and whole. You're not there to save them or help them. You're just there as a guide in a shared conversation and collaboration. And so I love that idea as applied to parenthood, which is, of course, actually, your kids will need a lot of help, but they are incredibly resilient. It's such an asset-based way of looking at it. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think we all navigate this, journey into motherhood in different ways, and parenthood in general. And the thing that's actually kept me really grounded in the process is like, yes, you are responsible for a human life, and you need to treasure and guard that and help create the next generation of human beings who are going to go on to do incredible things for our society. But also, people have been raising children for millennia. And so, it will be okay. It will be okay.
You know what? I kind of, in a month, sometime, I'm going to go into labor and delivery. And one thing I love is I have this doula friend that's like, pregnancy is not a medical crisis,
Right.
People have been doing it for centuries. And so it's also a nice reminder on parenting. People have been parenting for centuries. Trust your instincts, be a little self-compassionate and self-forgiving when we mess up.
Exactly.
I'm curious though, onto the trust and safety of just raising these kids. Are there any overlaps between how you have to think about strategic frameworks for your work for protecting teachers? And is there any overlap with motherhood? And I am just curious too about how you think about what does risk and compliance mean. So I am just curious a little bit more about your job. And are there ways that motherhood have made you even better at your job?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the core question that I have the privilege of getting to ask and answer in the Teach for America context is, what are the biggest both risks and opportunities that will impact our ability to achieve our objectives and sort of our mission overall? And I think in some ways the same thing applies to parenthood, right? Like, you're constantly as a parent thinking about what are the biggest ways that you get to impact the lives of the humans you are entrusted to raise, and how do you also weigh the risks, right? Like, at some point I'm going to have to let my son walk to school by himself. It is, I'm sure, going to feel a lot more risky to me as his mother, but I'm also going to have to figure out what is a term that we use in like the risk world is like, what is my risk appetite around that? Like, at what point am I ready to be like, okay, little bird, go out into the world? And so I've just really tried to take that same approach with parenting, of like, there are all sorts of micro decisions that we're going to have to make as parents. And how do we start to sort of philosophically align to what we want to be true of the way we orient to parenting, my partner and I, and what experience we want our children to have in that experience of that parenting, to weigh those risks and opportunities in terms of how we make each of the decisions along the way in pursuit of that.
Amazing. I love this term. I wrote down risk appetite. I love it. I love micro decisions. Micro decisions, though, I honestly felt tired even thinking about it, because those are the things that add up that I think can get really tired, especially if you've been making decisions all day at work, then to come home and have to make more decisions as a mom. Like in my 20s, when I worked at intense jobs like teaching, like consulting, I was always like, how do people go home and then be a mom? Like, how, and because I could turn off, I could put on Netflix, I wasn't like
Yep.
having to make more decisions. And so I haven't become a mom yet. So what is it like coming home? Though I love you've been working remotely for years now. How do those micro decisions increase your fatigue, or are there ways to again approach it with joy and a different
Yeah.
point of view?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. And I think, in many of the big life decisions I've made, especially as a partner with Brandon now, we thought about what are the core elements of what we need to be true. I think that was very true of how we planned like our wedding and now marriage. I think it has been true of like our parenting. Like, what are the top 3 things we want to be true? All the other stuff matters, but probably doesn't matter as much as we think it does. So like, how do we start to really align on those core elements so that we can ultimately not put as much strain on each of those micro decisions that may fall under that top 3 threshold, right? Like, yes, you are absolutely right. Every day we're making a zillion decisions. But like, I think by being able to be really focused on the things that we think are most important, we can then say, these are the things that like, we're going to be okay if like our kid doesn't do 12 extracurricular activities. Like that, what is it in service of? Like, and I think being able to be grounded in some of those top and most important things has allowed us to like take away the stress of some of the micro decisions, because it allows us sort of a North Star in those moments to say, okay, whether just, to sign up Jonah for swimming or basketball actually probably doesn't matter that much. Like, as long as he's doing something that he thinks is really fun, which is, the ultimate goal, that's what's important. And so that's at least how I've oriented in these moments, is being sort of generally clear on the things that are most important or the things that I'm really indexing for, has allowed me to not put as much pressure on the more minute or the smaller decisions. And then honestly, also just being like, what is good enough, right? Like,
Yes.
maybe my kid's going to eat the same dinner all week because that's what he's going to eat, and I'm going to be fine with that. And I'm not going to stress about it.
Good enough is hard. I'm sure every day it's like, okay, just remember, like, good enough. Because I think women in particular put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be more, and this concept of enough is really hard. On the first thing you said, I love the word align popped out at me. And I think alignment in a marriage is so critical. I am curious, like, can you share any of the like values that you like the two of you have come up with, or like an example of a North Star that you kind of live by as you make decisions as a team?
Yeah. I think 2 of the things that we have found ourselves really indexing on is like, what are the values or behaviors that we really want Jonah to reinforce with Jonah. So like, we have really thought about kindness and curiosity as being some of the core things. Like, if nothing else, those are things that we want to be true. And we want those to be true for Noemi as well. But we started with Jonah, so poor Noemi got forgotten as a second child. But that when we think about our kids, we want to make sure that those are 2 things that they really orient to, because we ultimately think they're the foundation for so many of the other things we want to be true of their lives. Is like, kindness, curiosity, and happiness are probably like, if they have those 3 things, they're probably going to be able to do a lot of other things really successfully. And I think being grounded in that has allowed us to then make other decisions, right? Like, if they are focused on those 3 things, then they're probably going to be able to like go through other experiences in really meaningful ways. And it's led us to go like, okay, if we're thinking about, I'll take us back to the like activity example. Like, yeah, we're probably not going to push our kid to like be a piano virtuoso at 3 years old, unless he shows a natural orientation. If those meet his needs in terms of being kind, curious, and happy. But if they don't, that's fine, right? Like he will learn the things he needs to learn eventually, and it will be fine. Especially at 4. I may talk to me in 5 years. I may feel differently, but that's I think been our orientation is like, what are the core things of what we want to be true for our children, and how do we unlock experiences and steward their path on this earth in ways that allow for that.
I love this philosophy. Tara, I also know you're religious. So how has your religion impacted your parenthood style, or just how you raise your kids? What kind of core values from your faith do you apply to your family?
Yeah, I think the thing that is most salient for me. So I was born and raised Catholic, and both my husband and I are still practicing Catholics. So we do have a sort of faith tradition in attending church and things. But I think the thing that is most salient to me from that experience is just this focus on community. One of the things that has always stuck out to me about my faith is this orientation to being part of this broader church community and the sort of communal nature of that. And that I think is the thing that I want our kids to take most away from our faith, is that they are not an island. They are part of a broader community and are living their lives in service of others. And so that I think would be the thing that I would, that I hope they will continue to sort of foster in their own growth, and that as their parents, that I feel particularly responsible to making sure that they walk into the world continuing to demonstrate.
Well, I know you do a good job at that, because you make me feel personally, I'm not even your kid, but that I'm not on an island and I have you. In fact, if I'm to hilariously show all the products I have behind me, half of them. So thank you for all the mommy hand-me-downs. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you can put them to use.
You have mentioned your incredible partner, Brandon. You are both executives, which is crazy. How has motherhood pushed your marriage in interesting ways? How do you realign if you ever feel out of alignment? Any advice for me too? Because I think it's, besides labor and delivery, I am kind of worried I'm not great about pain. I'm worried about my marriage, and not actively. You know my husband, but just it's something I want to prepare for and think about.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question. And like so many, I think especially the last year tested us in ways that we could have never imagined at the beginning of the pandemic. But ultimately, I think it just came down to like having lots of good and hard conversations when things feel out of alignment, and like getting under the roots of what that is like, and then also giving each other grace, right? There is just, it has been hard on everyone in different ways, shapes, and forms. And I think appreciating how we both react to the things that are hard, how we create space to get under the things that are hard. When one of us is not ready to have that conversation, like really just thinking about those dynamics has been really helpful. And there have been times we've done it better than others. But I've always appreciated the reality that like we are in one another's court, even when it is hard. And we will sort of figure it out together, sometimes gracefully, sometimes not. And either way, getting to an outcome and continue to reassess that outcome over time, I think has been important. The first couple months of the pandemic, especially as we were trying to navigate the working and keeping our children, happy and healthy. I would say we had a conversation like that every week, because it really took a lot to figure out how to make all the pieces work, as we were both trying to show up in the ways that we wanted to professionally, and knowing that we weren't probably even doing that, and also wanting to make sure that our kids had what they needed. And I think it was a really good, now in retrospect, it was a very good thing for our marriage, because it tested us in ways and applied a whole new set of pressures that we hadn't had before, that we had to navigate together.
Tara, my husband's birthday is this weekend. So I asked the dads I admire, including your husband, for advice, how to dad. And your husband actually said, like, like marriage comes first, because if you're building on a strong foundation of a strong marriage, the kids will be all right. And I just want to say, it made me so happy, because I think some people like wouldn't say that out loud, like your partner comes before your kids. And it's not like there has to be an order or a hierarchy, but it's like, if the marriage is strong, yes, that is going to benefit the kids. And so how do you invest in your marriage? Like it's lovely to hear, like you're great. You two are very high EQ. And so feedback and check-ins, but what about the positive stuff? How do you kind of create sparks of joy in your marriage and in sharing that time and space with your kids too?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will say, I mean, I think there's also ebbs and flows in like how much time I personally have invested in our marriage. And Brandon's probably candidly better at this than I am. And part of that is also related to like the realities of the first year of motherhood, right? Your children need you in a different way. And so there's just, I think I've been very lucky to have a partner who's like, I'm going to focus on this because that means that we can focus on it. And planning things like just finding time and space to make sure that we're having time to connect, whether it's the like silly show we watch in the evenings, or like now that you can do outdoor dining, like going out to lunch because we're both working from home and like blocking our calendars to do that. So, I would say it's looked different at different stages in our marriage. I think we were, very intentional about the dates and the weekend trips and just like creating time to bond early in our marriage. And what I have appreciated as we've become parents is that it looks different, but that we're creating, ways and spaces to do it and getting to a frequency that feels, that meets this stage of our lives. And that often includes our kids realistically, right? If it's the, trip to the park with the kids where we're sitting on a blanket and drinking a glass of wine, like that might be our new date. And that is just going to be what it is in this stage of our lives. But it does give us that time to connect.
Having been on a picnic with you with kids around, I love that you have the most amazing cooler backpack and there often is beer inside of it. So thank you.
Yes.
We are both feminists, Tara, and my startup is all about empowering women. You have a boy and a girl. I will acknowledge we over-gender kids. Like it shouldn't be blue for boys and pink for girls. The toy should be the same. But I am curious, how do you think about raising a son to be a feminist? How do you think about raising Noemi to be a feminist? I'm just curious, how do you think about that? And what have you seen that has surprised you? Or how do we make sure that they're both champions for women's rights and really human rights?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's interesting because Jonah is a very, from a personality perspective, a very like empathetic, just like gentle spirit. And it has been really interesting to see therefore how he like orients just to people in general. And candidly, a lot of his like earliest friends were girls. And so there's a little part of me that's like, wow, I feel like some of the work was done for me because just like his natural personality and then the like, some of his like first really close relationships sets the sort of foundation for what I hope will be his like orientation to just society in general. I also think it has been I know there's lots of gender stereotypes and things like Disney movies, but like a lot of the movies he loved the most had him wanting to be a princess at 3 years old.
I love that. Amazing. Good. Thank you, Disney.
Exactly. So like the fact that like, and the fact that I think we didn't put any value on wanting to do that or not has like, I think oriented him to seeing like Moana, for example, as like a super strong, super awesome person to aspire to be. Really, like a very mundane example, but like it is just interesting that in orienting or thinking about the content that he is consuming as a child, that like he's actually naturally appreciated and oriented to strong women in a lot of what he's reading and seeing, by virtue of there also just being more of that content out there in the world. So that's how I thought about him as our son, of just like sort of reinforcing the ability of anyone to, to do what they desire and trying to ensure that both the way that we show up in his community and then also the like, the community he's surrounded by, as well as the like sources of external influence are pretty gender balanced. For Noemi is feisty. She like one of her favorite books is Baby Feminist. We were really lucky to get a bunch of like lovely books from friends when she was born that I think just reinforced strong women. And so it's just been funny, both her personality and the way, again, the sort of like content and the external influences in her life, I think hopefully are setting the foundation for her to know that she is capable of anything and people are capable of anything, to guide both of them as they continue to grow and learn and sort of stake their claim in the world.
What you're saying about Disney and children's books, the power of having diverse representation so that we can see ourselves in the media that we consume. I'm curious, are there other ways that that's just like such a great and important lesson for Hollywood, if anyone's listening. But also, has motherhood changed your perception of the world? Like, are there ways that I just want to share a comment from the audience. Baby Feminist is my new favorite book. Thank you, Paula. I'm clearly going to need to Amazon it.
It's awesome.
Every night with baby boy Blueberry, so that he is a proud feminist. I'm just curious, are there other ways that motherhood has changed how you see the world? Like something you might not have observed, and then you see it from a mom's eyes and you're like, I didn't want my kids seeing things that way. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the thing that has I haven't thought about it as much in terms of external influences, though it is really interesting to appreciate how different our children's experiences is when it comes to content and how much more ability we have to curate that content than I even think about like my own childhood. So like, for example, Jonah was really confused when he saw his first commercial because he doesn't watch traditional TV very often, right? It's like curated Netflix, PBS Kids, like things that actually are where we have a lot of control about the content right now at this age, a lot of control on the content that we have. So I've actually been really appreciative and as a parent in this era to be able to say, oh yeah, I don't have to worry about you seeing the Cheetos commercial because you're not actually likely going to see the Cheetos commercial, as a super benign example. And just that ability as a parent to be able to, in very subtle ways, direct or curate our children's like the content they receive. Now, there's all of the like additional influences that come from kids being in daycare and things like that. So like Jonah knows all about superheroes and like a bunch of other things that I personally wouldn't have introduced him to, but here we are, and I'm just going to be okay with it.
No, wait, I want to hear what's bad about superheroes. And I'm sure there's many things. I want to know your take.
More than anything, I mean, the thing that like we have oriented to is just like, how do we make sure that like we use our words versus like solving things through, physical means. And so, yeah, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with superheroes, but appreciating that, like, as a little boy, I don't want him to be as gendered as to think like, as I should be Superman. Like that is the thing I should be aspiring to. And in order to do that, I have to like, beat up the kid next to me because that's what superheroes do. Right. And so that's more on my mind, and just appreciating actually this is a unique moment in parenting because of some of those realities of how technology enables us to steward our children's experiences. And then the like realities of at some point we won't be able to control it. And so we'll have to figure out what those guardrails look like.
Speaking of how we use our words, how has motherhood made you a better communicator? And how have your kids made you a better human being in general? Because I'm honestly, this comes from I actually think a baby is going to be easier than a toddler because I'm worried about verbal sparring with a toddler. So what have you learned? What should I be prepared for on how I can communicate better? And then I'm curious, has it applied to your life, whether work or just, again, improved human being skills?
It's a great question. I think on the communication front, it has been really interesting because toddlers will tell it to you straight. Like when you say something that doesn't make sense, they will be like, I don't know what you mean. And so it just made me really appreciate being more precise in my communication. And in a way that I don't always like think about when I'm talking to grownups, because you don't always have to be as precise, or like, what word was I actually trying to use there? So it's made me much more attuned to my language, especially with our kids, in terms of how I say things, what I expressly mean, so that they, they can feel like they know what I need from them or what they need to be doing. I think that has been my biggest takeaway, is like, what am I actually trying to say? And am I saying it in the best possible way? That I've especially learned from being a mom.
Teaching taught me how to give better directions. And I will say, I led a workshop last night, and you'd say something before a breakout room, and then someone would raise your hand and be like, I clearly didn't do a good job. And it's just like, it's like always great practice. I'm curious if you had to name 3 skills that you've gotten, 3 muscles, let's say, that you've gotten to work on as a mom, where you've grown and improved. An example being patience. What are 3 muscles that you've been working on in the past 3+ years since Jonah and now Noemi arrived?
I think the first would be prioritization. I as a general orientation, want to do everything. And right, I think this is something you and I share, Jackie. And so it has led me to be more disciplined and, figure out how and what to prioritize. And I think in conjunction with that, really just being clear on getting clearer on what I value and what's important to me. So, one of the inherent tensions, I think, around motherhood, and I will get to a third one eventually, but the that I have found to be a tension is like, this idea that we should be doing it all, right? And we should be doing it all perfectly. And I think this is like an inherent tension for people in general, but also, and especially as parents, as you're just pulled in more directions. And I think what's been interesting for me to reflect on is appreciating what is important to me, and then being able to translate that into the prioritization of how I focus my time and energy, right? So for example, it's really important to me that I have quality time with my kids every day. And as a result, the like post dinner or pick up from school, dinner, post dinner routine, that is a solid like 3.5 hours is pretty protected time in my day. I don't take work phone calls. I am like doing my best every day to make that time one where I'm not distracted. Do I do it perfectly? No, probably not. But it's been an important sort of guardrail in how I think about my day, to be able to say, this is important to me. And the way that is going to manifest, or how I'm going to prioritize that, is actually to make sure that from 5:30 to 7:38 when the kids go to bed, like, I'm as present as I can. Has that led to like real moments where I've had to really think about like, gosh, what does that mean for me professionally? What does that mean for how I like, spend my time generally? Absolutely. And so I think it's been interesting to have to reflect on like, what is important to me? And then how does that actually influence how and what I prioritize, to feel comfortable with the trade-offs that we're all inherently going to have to make. And then, I think the third thing that we touched on a little bit in this conversation is then like, and what is good enough in all dimensions, right? What is good enough as a mother? What is good enough as a professional and an executive? And how do I get comfortable with the fact that there is always the possibility of being incrementally better in all of those spaces, and like not letting that drive my level of like satisfaction or ability to contribute, because ultimately I think it can be really challenging if you constantly feel like you're not doing enough and not showing up enough.
we are actually hosting a workshop next Monday at YaYa about the scarcity mindset, which is a mindset that I often have, which is I'm not doing enough. There's not enough time. It's not good enough, as opposed to an abundance mindset, which is like, wow, I'm so grateful for all this wealth of resources and friendships that I have that are going to help me get by and get through. So just like, thank you for sharing that. I love that you even said the word satisfaction, because I do find like if I have a really productive day, it super impacts my satisfaction with life and my happiness. Right. And if I have an unproductive day that feels less than good enough, it impacts how I come home. And I think that's one of the muscles that I want to work on is compartmentalization, which is how do you leave work at work and turn the phone on do not disturb and be present from that 5 to 8:30 hours, and ideally more, with your partner after the kids go to bed. So I'm just curious, actually, do you have any family traditions? I think about like I want to be a mom that like kids, you have to put your cell phones in the bowl for family dinner, but you have a 3.5-year-old and an 8-month-old, so no cell phones yet, thank gosh. But any fun family traditions that you want to share or that you're looking forward to starting as they get older?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the couple of things that have become just sort of parts of our ways of being, weekend breakfasts. So like special breakfasts in our house that usually are some version of pancakes. And as just like a time to do something a little different and like feel connect as a family. And the kids love pancakes, so that really helps.
It's been a pregnancy tradition, Saturday pancakes.
Right? They are just delightful things. So that would be, I would say, one. And I think the other two are probably, we just do a lot of like trying to make time for reading with the kids. Like they love books. We love books. We love reading to them. Noemi, and we invested in a bookshelf in the kids' room that I would say is like sort of like the centerpiece of their room. And so it's just been really fun to see them develop their like own interest in reading and stories and storytelling that is part of their nighttime tradition, and is something that both Brandon and I like love to do with them. And I would say the last thing would be just having it's a tradition that initially I wasn't like super up on, but I've really come to like appreciate, is Brandon will turn on music as soon as the kids get home. And it's just like a nice mental break to like have music on in the background as we're sort of starting the dinner routine, as we're eating dinner together. The reason I wasn't up on it is sometimes it's a little loud and I can't actually hear our kids. So I'm like, Brandon, tone it down over there. But
or the Ross from Friends.
Exactly. But I think actually as a, just way to your point to compartmentalize this like sort of mark this transition in and create dedicated time and really like mark that for ourselves, both mentally and using, a myriad of our senses, has been a really nice sort of evening thing that we do.
This is a PG-13 comment, but not related to kids. But I do want to say I read once in my 20s that a home that has more music playing also has more sex. So, and then maybe there's something to be said about a person who's willing to like have music and like, be sensual in all the senses. So I
love that.
I just like love having music on. I'm like, this is going to be good for my sex life. Back to more serious topics. And in fact, I started this project of wanting to interview moms I admire, partly because I feel like people don't talk about the hard stuff. And so a 90-degree transition is, what are the hard topics of what I'm about to go through that you think aren't talked about enough? And any stage of it, like the first 2 weeks or going back to work, anything, what do you feel like doesn't get said enough?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's also just an interesting question thinking about like the two little humans, because I feel like I had different orientations to what was hard with each of them. I think the things that are on my mind, one is like, it is sometimes hard to do, and we all will inherently do it, but like comparing kids, right? Not whether it's within your family or with other kids. Like there are times where we all go like, oh, wow, that little boy who's the exact same age as my kid is like reading Shakespeare. Should my kid be able to do that? And just not getting sort of trapped in that, right? And that coming back to those like 3 things that we talked about earlier of like, what are like our ultimate objectives for our children, has helped snap me out of those moments when I'm like, I think my son's great, but I also am biased as his mother to think he's great. And sort of getting myself out of the trap of just comparing kids and appreciating the just like unique talents and gifts of each little human on this earth. So I would say that is one place that can be hard. And that I think like depending on your personality, you may need to build like discipline around just like how to orient to those moments, so they don't suck unnecessary energy in an already time consuming and emotionally consuming experience of parenthood. The other things that I think are hard is I would say the like dynamic of, while we are all trying to break gender stereotypes, also being okay with the fact that like, as a mom specifically, it is okay to want to spend time with your kids, right? Like you are not less of a professional because you also want to have a relationship with your children. I know I personally had to do a little bit of like breaking that, of just appreciating that like I now have this dual role, and figuring out what the right investment for me personally was in that was really important. And I don't think sometimes that tension is as present prior to being a mom. And then when it is present, I personally have not done enough self-interrogation to be like, how am I going to orient to that and like be comfortable for myself that I am making the right sort of trade-offs or decisions in terms of where and how I spend my time.
I wrote that quote down, by the way. You are not less of a professional for wanting to spend time with your kids. I think that's super powerful. It also, I think though, the good enough standard applies to both work and motherhood. How can you do the same thing too, which is you are not less of a mom if you want to work a little more. I don't know. I'm curious, how do you do the flip side of it?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. It's that, ultimately it's like knowing yourself, right? And doing the self-interrogation on like, what is important to you? And some of that I think you can do in advance. And I think some of it happens real time as you are actually navigating some of those decision points to feel comfortable about those daily, decisions and trade-offs that you're making, and how satisfied you feel at the end of them. And developing a point of view for yourself on what that looks like and what that should feel like, and what meaning you're making of it, so that you can really sort of be able to look at yourself as a professional and as a mother and feel like, yep, okay, I'm showing up in the way I want to.
Do you have advice for me for maternity leave specifically? It's, this brief, rare thing. Probably it's a man that named it like leave or time off. Because I know it is not a vacation. Neil keeps telling people, he's like, I'm really looking forward to like taking time off. People are like, do you know what paternity leave is actually like? But actually, any just like words of wisdom about, it's this very special, sacred time apart from the world with our family unit. And particularly there's 5 weeks that I'll get with Neil there too, with overlapping grandparents. Just how can I suck the marrow of it, or should I not put that pressure on myself?
I would say, I think leave, which is just an interesting term for it in general, is a really unique moment. And, and I think actually it is so interesting to think about how we oriented this as a society, and that it is not available to all people, because I don't know how, anyone is expected to go back into the workforce directly after bringing life into the world, especially those who are actually physically bringing life into the world, given the myriad of experiences that people have. That aside, I will get off my soapbox now.
No, I'm very happy it was said. Systemic issues.
But I think the thing that is on my mind for those of us who are lucky enough to have leave is that you should find the things that are able to give you joy in that period of time. It is going to be exhausting in many ways, as you're figuring out how to meet the needs of a human who can't meet any of their own needs. But there are also some really beautiful, things that can be true of that time, depending on what is important to you. My leaves looked very different with our two children, because with Jonah, it was just the three of us, right? We did a bunch of trips. We, went on adventures. Like, the kid spent at least a week of his first 4 months on airplanes, which is not a normal thing for most children. Because we were like, we're just gonna take him everywhere. We went to London and Paris at 10 weeks. We went to Michigan for Christmas. We just did a lot of things, and which are probably not as viable right now in the middle of a pandemic. But that was important for that stage. Whereas with Noemi, we had a almost 3-year-old at that time who was in daycare. And so we had a very different leave. So I think with some of the other things I've said on this, I think figuring out what you want to be true, or so what are the things you are most indexing for? Is it, really dedicated family time? Is it your own sanity? What are those things that are going to be important? And it may influence then how you structure the time. So for example, one of the things that with both kids, I was lucky to have deliveries that made this possible. We got out of the house very quickly after they were both born, and just took them out into the world. Again, we weren't dealing with the global pandemic, so it was different. But made sure to do just a lot of taking walks and being outdoors, and partially because that was important for my sanity. Yeah. And then also appreciating the things that made our lives easier in those moments. So similar to you, we were lucky to have some parent support, and I actually probably did not take advantage of that parent support as much as I probably should have. But just having, both having the company, but then also having, someone to help if, make a lunch, or do some of those just self-care things that you don't often get to focus on as much as you're trying to navigate becoming new parents. And so I think those would be some of the things I would think about, are there any things that you are really eager, more philosophically, not the action list? I really don't think having a to-do list is always the best way to go into leave, because what you think is possible and what is actually possible, I have found personally to be different. Other people may be more productive on leave than I was. And then, so yeah, sort of philosophically, what do you want to be true of your leave? And what would you look back and be that was time well spent, right? I really bonded with my kids. I was able to do some things that made me feel healthier and better. So a lot on both leaves, I just did a lot of walks with the kids, because it was nice to get out and get the fresh air. And then how do you orient to the other people who can be part of your leave and maximize that experience with them, whether it is just having the company or candidly the real support that often families are able to provide if you're lucky enough to be able to bring them into that experience.
My husband and I watched The Crown, the show about the British Crown, and Philip, Prince Philip, who passed away recently, he was told she's the job. And I mentioned that only because some people have told Neil at the beginning, take Jackie is the job. And so I'm just curious, what should I be asking for? In a how could I communicate? And partly it's okay, just communicate your needs. And but is there any advice that actually you would give Neil in supporting me that I can?
Yeah, I think the things I would say are, communicate your needs, and don't be I think as strong women, sometimes it's hard to actually communicate your needs because you're so used to doing things for yourself, right? And so don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that's actually advice I did not take myself as I think about both of my leaves, because I didn't want to inconvenience other people, but people really do want to be there for you, right? And make your life easier and take care of you. And it's just as gratifying and satisfying for them as it is for you. So use let them be part of that experience with you. And so, I think don't be afraid, or don't don't underplay the things that you need, and that could really help those first couple of months be even better and richer, by indexing for other people's needs and wants and desires, and not being like, this actually getting another hour of sleep right now would be really great. And then the advice I had for Neil is just like, take the baby whenever you can. Like, the baby is going to physically need you as the, Jackie, as the mother, right? There's like very biological needs that child will have. Exactly. And there, for those first couple of months, that they will be a lot, right? Like, they are eating all the time. They're eating, sleeping, and pooping, with like brief periods of being awake. And so I think the places where Neil can physically give you some space to take the shower, to, do something on your own, because you physically have a human attached to you for so much of, the first couple of months of life, is like, just are both really precious time for them to spend together and bond, and can give you a little bit of space to do some of the like things that end up, until you have a parent, or until you have a child, you don't appreciate, like how luxurious they actually can feel, like taking a shower or going to the bathroom by yourself. Again, like, seems silly, but like, they end up becoming like, oh, right, I want to do those things solo without a baby bouncer in the bathroom, or like,
Thanks, you. I have one of those, so I'm ready.
So like those would be some of the things just that I found myself thinking about as I thought about my leave, and then how my partner could support me.
You mentioned one aspect of your faith that you want to transmit to your children is the sense of community. I also believe in the value of community. That's a big pillar for YaYa. Check us out at joinyaya.com. But who have been the women and the moms that have been the anchors of your community? Who do you look up to? And then how do you think about supporting all the other flailing soon-to-be moms like myself? But let's start with who are the moms that you leaned on and continue to lean on?
Yeah, gosh, it's such a great question. I mean, there's obviously the family moms, my mother, my grandmothers, who have been incredible sources of inspiration and support over the years. I think the thing that has been most striking to me, becoming a mom, is I was really lucky, especially with our first pregnancy, to have this incredible set of moms from the GSB. And so many of us ended up entering that phase of our lives at the same time. And so appreciative to be able to have this group of incredibly strong, thoughtful, and just like kind and compassionate women to go on that journey with, because they were around at 3 a.m. when a good chunk of us were up feeding a child, or, putting a child down or something. And just knowing that there were other people going through that experience at the same time, was incredibly, incredibly helpful. And so with Noemi, it was one of the things that I like actively looked out for. But there was a little bit more staggering in our second pregnancy. So I still rely heavily on that group of women. They are just incredible humans. And I found myself really actively seeking that out, with my second pregnancy, to make sure that I had a community of women here in Berkeley that could be, just an outlet, a resource, a community to go through that journey with, in addition to the incredible, mother community that I had formed with Jonah.
And where did you end up finding them? I'm just curious.
One of the benefits of Facebook, there is an incredibly strong sort of Facebook Berkeley parents and Berkeley moms community. And so every couple of months, someone will start a new post of like, I'm going to have a kid around this time. Like, would love to meet up for walks. And again, this is more true pre-pandemic. So I'll be curious to see how those things start to reemerge as life gets back to whatever the new normal is. But felt really lucky to be able to just find others who were in a similar stage and who were also on leave, who wanted to, to build that community as we all took the step with with becoming moms either again or for the first time, and having one another to be able to engage with.
Well, thank you. I'd love ending on this note about community, because that is what drives me, my life, my work. As you know, this is all about YaYa. You are a YaYa to me. A YaYa is a woman who's been there and done that and can like help you get through the tunnel. And so even though I don't expect you to be up at 3 a.m., whenever you do wake up and want to respond to my 3 a.m. questions,
Please.
in the coming months, they will be coming. I also really believe in like no stress, no obligation friendship, which is like, just, you'll get some random please. Anyway, I can't wait to spend time with you in fun ways and not just call on you when I'm drowning.
Please, whatever it looks like. I'm so excited to support and celebrate this next phase of your lives. It's just going to be, you were built for this, and I think it'll be so fun to see you both take this next step as parents.
Thank you so much.